Hello, welcome to the Career Discovery podcast. On the show today, we'll be learning about our guests' area of expertise, their career journey, and what they wish they'd known when they were just starting out. Thanks so much for watching. We really hope you enjoy the show. Hello, Van. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. I can't wait to do a deep dive into your role and your experiences. So really grateful that you're joining us today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
All right. Well, how about we get started? Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and how long you've been doing it for?
Of course, yeah. I'm Van Loo. I head the currency management team at Russell Investments, an asset manager. I also chair the rates and currency strategy group. So we make recommendations that are implemented in our portfolios. I have 22 years of financial market experience, and I've worked at a bank, a sovereign wealth fund, and now at an asset manager.
Brilliant. Wow, can't wait to get further into that. Thank you for sharing. So before we get into it, I've got to ask, this is a podcast. Do you like listening to podcasts?
I love podcasts. I subscribe to quite a lot of them. And yeah, some of them go unlistened to. Especially we stopped commuting now. So I listen to them on like a long morning walk or evening walk.
Yeah.
My current favorite is Lex Fridman.
Okay,
Do you know Lex
Fridman? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a long-form interview show. So he's a scientist himself, but he interviews accomplished, remarkable people from all spheres of life, scientists and so on and so forth. So recently he had some interviews with chess players, so I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And he also interviewed the CEO of DeepMind, which is like an artificial intelligence company. So I learned a lot about artificial intelligence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Podcast definitely my thing.
Yeah, it's such a great forum, isn't it? Because I think you can get so much from podcasts. I really love listening to the business ones and the personal development ones, but there's great history ones and entertainment, and there's really something for everybody. And it's such a great medium that you can, like you say, you can do it while you're commuting, and it's a really good. Yeah, I love them. Brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, I do the politics ones for entertainment.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't name them because I would then give away maybe my political leanings. But yeah, there you go.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, now we're going to get into your area of expertise. But before we get into it, I'd love to know if there are any common misconceptions about what you do. What do your friends and family outside of the industry think you do all day, for example?
So the most common question I get is, do you work in a bank? And then sometimes I say I do, even though it's not factually correct, because it's just easier than having to explain what asset management is.
Yeah.
Yeah, people don't really have an idea of what asset management is.
Yeah.
But I think we'll get into that.
We definitely will. And actually, now's a really good time. Could you give us an overview of the asset management industry? That would be really helpful for the audience.
Yeah, definitely. So a simple explanation of asset management is that we help invest savings into financial markets. For example, shares in companies or any bonds that governments issue to provide for either a pension later or some other savings goals. So we facilitate the investment of savings into financial markets.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really helpful. And it actually, when something is so complex, it really helps to have it simplified. So that's really helpful. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, let's take a deep dive into what you're doing. What does an average day or week look like in currency management?
Yeah, it can be quite exciting. We were just chatting before recording that, there's been some political developments recently with the mini budget in the UK, which caused some volatility in bond markets and currency markets. So we have to deal with that. Yeah, so I had the currency management team, and broadly speaking, we do two things. One is to manage currency risk. So when you invest internationally, you are exposing yourself to currency risk. So if I buy the shares of Apple, the company, then I take the risk of the share price, but I also take the US dollar risk because it's a US company. And so we help investors manage that currency risk, but we also use the currency markets to generate additional returns. So those are basically the main things we do. And then when it comes to interest rates, so going back to that example that I gave earlier with the mini budget, which obviously caused a very significant spike in interest rates in the UK, then we have to figure out what to do with the bonds. Should we sell them? Should we hold on to them? And obviously that has repercussions for the outcomes that our clients can achieve.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And then thinking about your work on an average day or week, and perhaps we can split it into leadership as well as anything you're doing individually. What would that look like? What kind of tasks or activities or are you doing day to day?
Yeah, I'm very happy to share that. So I oversee a team of portfolio managers and analysts. And so that would involve speaking to my team on a day-to-day basis. We have a call every day where we kind of go over what needs to be traded on that particular day, or if there's any client activity coming up, meetings and so forth. Part of being a manager also involves dealing with problems or not so pleasant issues. Very rare, but if an error was made somewhere trading something, or clients want to escalate some issues that they have. So that's part of my role. Luckily, that's really a very small part because of how competent the team is. And then in terms of my individual contributions, I'm quite deeply involved in the research of financial markets. So that's important to formulate the strategies that I mentioned earlier. So I will read some other people's research, look into data, write up my own views, take part in meetings to communicate those views. Yeah, it's quite a varied job, and that's what makes working in financial markets quite interesting, and it never gets boring.
Yeah. And for that work, are you using any specialist tools or programs that the audience might be aware of?
What's really important is using sources of reliable financial, market, and economic data. So I would use something like Bloomberg Terminal, or there's another similar service called Refinitiv Eikon. So this is just to make sure we know where the market is, but also look at the history, because I think the history can tell us, can help us to make decisions. At Russell Investments, we have our in-house systems as well, portfolio management systems. So I need to look at those. And then I do a little bit of coding myself. So knowing Python or R or some similar package is quite useful.
Yeah. And In terms of interacting with other people within the business, I'm guessing that's a actually internal and external. I'm guessing that's becomes a part of your role.
100%, yeah. And I mean, communication with others is very important. You mentioned the internal stakeholders. So we are responsible for the portfolio management and the research. And there's what we would call client-facing colleagues who look after the client relationship, and we interface closely with them to make sure, if the client needs something, that gets passed on to us, or we will arrange meetings with clients, prospective clients, regulators. So the client-facing side we interface a lot with, and then there are some internal functions that are also very important for us to deal with. Lawyers, risk and compliance people. So that's very specific to my function that I deal with all of these other internal stakeholders.
Yeah.
But you mentioned clients, and yeah, I mean, interacting with clients is probably one of the most rewarding aspects of the job.
Yeah.
Because they challenge you, maybe they want a better service, or they have a new requirement, and that I think challenges us to enhance our capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you. And we've talked about an average week there, or average day. Are there any events or activities that happen less frequently that you could share with us?
Yeah, there are monthly or quarterly meetings, often with clients or internal groups as well, investment committee meetings, where we review what's been happening in the market, and we make decisions, let's say, to change our portfolio. So those are the investment meetings. Some kind of more exciting events or occurrences are client pitches. If there's a prospective client and they're close to making a decision who they want to hire, then often they would come in for a day and grill us on whether we are really up to scratch for what they need. So these client pitches are quite an exciting part of the job.
Yeah, especially if you win the pitch.
Yes, that's a happy occasion. Yeah.
And of course, currency markets are global, so I'm guessing you're interacting with people all over the world. What does that look like?
For sure, yeah. So our clients are global. We have clients across all the continents. A lot of them in Europe. So that's why I'm based here, and the majority of the team is based here. But we have a good client business in Japan as well. So just before COVID, I was traveling to Japan to meet our clients there, and the Russell colleagues, Australia, North America. So it's a pretty global business, and there is opportunity to travel if you want to. And I guess that's kind of gradually restarting as well.
Yeah, yeah. During the pandemic, did you, was it a mixture of hybrid working, or did you have to be in the office the whole time?
No, for us, we switched to home working 100% during the height of the pandemic. Yeah. So we've now gone back to a hybrid model, but actually that was a very challenging period. Just because of the volatility in financial markets. Actually, from a technological perspective, we were really very well prepared. I mean, our IT people are top notch. So we always had laptops and had the appropriate systems to work remotely, so we could switch from one day to the other from being in the office to working at home. But it was just the financial market volatility during that time that was very, very challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So tell us what you love most about your job, Van.
I'd say interacting with people. So in terms of the leadership role, I think the most rewarding thing is probably seeing people develop and grow and doing my part in that growth. So that, I would say, is one of the most rewarding aspects of the job. Yeah. The other thing I would mention is creating something new, a new, capability. In my first job, I created a commodities research service within the research department that previously didn't exist. That was quite a proud moment. So that involved kind of initially writing up the research reports at the weekend, and then bringing in some people, some traders, some people that weren't research people. But then once you have the product there, which was like a compendium of the commodities markets, people wanted more, and that kick-started regular coverage of that particular market.
Yeah.
So it was pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think a great feeling when you can build something and then people use it, and sometimes these things outlive us in companies, and that's a really great feeling, right?
For sure, yeah, that was the case in the example that I gave. So that commodities research is still going strong today, and I've long left that role. I mean, maybe another thing I would mention, since we're in financial markets, is you take decisions in financial markets that have a very tangible impact in terms of returns, or how much money people have for their retirement.
Yeah.
And one of the proudest moments, I would say, for me, was giving a specific piece of advice about not increasing the allocation to a specific asset class that over time literally saved billions. So I won't mention, the asset class or the employer, but it's you can, I mean, at least I tell myself the story that if I don't do anything else in my career, I can be very very proud of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you impacted retirees, really, really in a really big way, it sounds like. So I can see why that would make you proud. Yeah. And what about the challenges of the work? Tell us about those.
Yes, the one thing I mentioned when you asked about the COVID period is, sometimes you have extreme movements in the markets, and you need to transact a lot. So just going through that volume of work is sometimes challenging. And the other very challenging bit about the markets is that you'd never master the markets, or they always prove you wrong in one way or another. The likelihood of being wrong is maybe a bit less if you have certain technical skills, if you analyze thoroughly. But then in the end, it's not only about the technical skill, it's also a bit about psychology. That you don't lose your nerve, or you don't you stay objective, and that's definitely always a big challenge in financial markets.
Yeah, trying to, I guess, take the emotion out of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. So I'd really love to go back to the beginning, Van, and then we can start hearing about your journey to this place in currency management. But when you were young, when you were starting out, what did you want to be when you grew up?
A writer.
Mm-hmm. What inspired that?
Reading a lot of books. So yeah, I was giving this experience in another context, but my parents emigrated to Germany from Vietnam, and so when I arrived, I didn't speak any German. I was quite young. I was 5 years old. Then the way I picked up the language was my father took me to the local library, and then you borrow the books.
Yeah.
I used to read sometimes a book a day.
Wow.
And so the reading, and I started then writing. I was quite decent at writing. So yeah, I think writing is something that I enjoyed. And it's actually a skill that is quite useful in this job. Maybe surprisingly to some people, but yeah, writing clearly is quite important.
Yeah.
In this industry, and I would say in any kind of professional context, writing clearly is very, very important.
Yeah. And what kind of things were you writing? Was it creative writing or?
Yeah, creative writing. But yeah, in the end, I mean, obviously, I didn't take it up as any kind of job. And writing these days is non-fiction writing for sure, but it's still useful to have the practice of having written and written a lot.
Yeah. And when you were having these thoughts of being a writer, is that something that you talk to parents or other caregivers or teachers about?
Not really. I mean, I didn't have much careers advice from my parents or my teachers. Well, I mean, my teachers were very, very supportive because, they saw that I was kind of my academic achievements were quite strong. So they certainly sensed that I could go into an academic direction. But I actually studied something that didn't really fit in with the strengths that I mentioned earlier. Writing. My first degree was in business. So I enjoyed social sciences at school. So that was one reason. But I think another key reason was that being from a background that's not financially privileged, I kind of implicitly chose something that was had a higher likelihood of providing financial security.
Yeah.
Something practical. I then switched to economics, which I liked a lot better than business. So I really loved economics.
Yeah.
So my graduate studies I did in economics. So I did a doctoral degree in economics, and kind of that subject is still provides endless fascination.
Yeah. And it's something you can go really deep into, isn't it? At university, I did management studies, which it's basically the same as business studies. And actually the reason I chose it was because it was so broad. But actually in hindsight, as much as I really enjoyed the course, I didn't really get to go deep into anything. And I think that would have been really useful for me. But, hindsight's a wonderful thing, of course.
Yeah, you can go very deeply into economics. That's definitely true.
So you finished your study of economics, and then what happened?
So I probably had the choice of either becoming an academic or going into the financial industry. Economics and the financial markets is quite a nice combination. So I took up my first job in the economic research department of a large German bank.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very, very nice fit. I mean, it was a bit of fortunate coincidence, because I said that I didn't have a lot of people advising me that you should do this or you should do this based on your skills profile. This is a good career. So I just looked around. I did an internship during my doctoral studies. I did an internship in corporate finance at an investment bank.
Yeah.
And one thing I knew is I didn't want to do that. Because it was long hours and a lot of very repetitive work. But there's also very, very exciting aspects of investment banking.
Yeah. And actually, I think that speaks to the value of internships. You might try something that you think, yeah, this is it. This is really what I want to do. Go into it, and it might show you that it's not what you want to do, and that's okay. Equally valuable at the end of it, the experience, but you just now know that you're, perhaps headed in a different direction.
Mm-hmm. I think, if anything, it's maybe more valuable that you've tried something that you wouldn't enjoy, rather than spending a year or 2 years just drudging on and doing something that you don't enjoy.
Yeah. Okay, so you're at the German bank, and then how does that shake out?
Yeah, that was actually a fantastic experience, because I was super lucky. So I started as an analyst, economic analyst at the bank. My manager moved up one level, and then after about a year, and after some twists and turns, he asked me, "Do you want to take my old job, which is leading a group of economists and strategists?" And I was a little bit more than 1 year into the job, so that was a surprise. But then, I really enjoyed that role once I took it on. Just learning by doing in terms of people management was a bit tricky as well. But I immensely enjoyed that. And for personal reason, at some point, I needed to move to London. Was a bit hesitant. On the one hand, maybe kind of leaving behind this role that I enjoyed. On the other hand, not knowing what the market's like in London. So there was a little bit of begrudging move, but it turned out well. So I think I really had a good path after moving to London. Much more international outlook.
Yeah,
meeting a lot of people that I wouldn't have met if I just stayed in the one place.
Yeah.
So it was a bit forced upon me, but in the end, I think I was glad for it.
Yeah. And did you move with the bank, or did you switch employers at that point?
No. So I changed jobs. Actually, the first job I had in London was at Russell Investments. And this is actually my second stint at the company. So I left and then I came back. And I'm still here now. So
then that was your switch from banking to asset management. So not only were you
That's
changing
right.
location, you were changing sector too. So what were the what were the learnings from that transition?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there's one anecdote that I can share. Actually, today is the day when the labor market report in the US gets published. It's a very important, in financial markets, very important day, because it's a very important piece of data. And when I was at the bank on the trading floor, obviously everyone was waiting for the number. As the economist, we were expected to give some commentary on it. There's lots of activity after the number, especially if it's a big surprise. People, putting on trades or changing positions or calling up clients. And then when I arrived at Russell Investments, because at the time we were much more manager of managers kind of business. We managed relatively little money directly, but it was outsourced to external parties. On the day that the job market report came out, it was like a library. No one cared because there was nothing that they could have done about it. So that was quite a change, a bit of a shock.
Yeah.
But I got used to it. And these days at Russell Investments, I mean, it's changed quite a bit. So I mean, there's a bit of buzz around when important pieces of data get published.
Yeah. So maybe just a bit calmer and less shaken by global events. Am I hearing that right? Or
yes, maybe more long term, because with the bank, the traders have their book.
Yeah.
They need to manage their positions even in the very short term, whereas with an asset management company, you invest for the long term.
Yeah.
And, whether a certain number is higher and lower than expected, maybe it doesn't change your long-term outlook that much.
Yeah. Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And we might, what we'll do is we'll put some definitions in the episode description so people can find out more about things like manager of managers if they want to. Okay.
Yeah, sorry for using that jargon.
No, it's great. It's helpful, and people can find out more if they want to. So you've made the switch. You're in London and you're working in asset management. And is this still in an economist role, or is this now in currency management?
Yeah, so part of my role involves using my economist skill set.
Yeah.
So I'm involved in formulating strategy, but most of my job these days is overseeing the currency management. And there's certain new skills that I had to learn that I didn't deal with before. I mentioned previously, all the legal side of things, contracts was never something I had to deal with as a research person. Yeah. But obviously, if you are in the business of, managing money for clients, it has to have a legal basis. And then we get involved talking to our lawyers with the client's lawyers. So, there's always some new skills that you have to pick up, which, maybe you weren't studying at university, but you just learn by doing on the job.
Yeah. Yeah. So expanding different skills, I guess I'm continuing to lead people, and when in between Russell 1 and now, what was that role?
I worked for a sovereign wealth fund. Sovereign wealth fund, it basically invests the money of a country. And, the funds for these sovereign wealth funds could come from, commodities earnings like oil, or they could come from other export earnings. So there's quite a few countries that have these state funds, and I was working for one of the sovereign wealth funds, one of the largest ones. Yeah.
And was that in a similar role to the role you're in now?
In a similar role in a research and asset allocation role. So again, using my economist skill set and my skill set as, someone who looks at financial markets. We call it almost a macro view, maybe from the top down.
Yeah.
Whereas if I was looking at specific companies, and I was looking at the balance sheet of specific companies, is what they call more like a bottom-up view. So I've always had this macro view of the financial markets rather than the bottom-up view.
Yeah. Very interesting. All right. So then that brings us to where you are today in the current role now.
Mm-hmm.
So looking back on that journey, from economics student to today, what have been the highs of the journey? What's gone well or what's run relatively smoothly?
I'd say I was very fortunate with timings when I mentioned that, bit more than a year into the job, I was offered this leadership role. So that was definitely luck.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have some luck along the way. So that worked out quite well. And I think what's the most important thing, rather than, having certain job titles or certain level of compensation or number of direct reports or what things that give you status. What's more important, I think, is the job content. And in terms of the job content, I've been extremely lucky that 90% of what I've done, I've enjoyed.
Yeah.
There's 10% of the things naturally in any kind of job, some of the things you don't like so much. And maybe that leads us to the challenging stuff, like, conflict with colleagues or other, external counterparties.
Mm-hmm.
Conflict is always a bit challenging.
Yeah.
I think, things do go wrong when you are in any kind of professional environment, and then dealing with these types of situations. I mean, can be also satisfying when you get to a good resolution, but generally speaking, I think those are the more challenging moments. Yeah.
And looking back on the journey again, what have been the challenging parts of that journey? Perhaps a failure you had to overcome or a limiting belief, for example.
Yeah, I mentioned that when I moved to London, kind of my mindset was, okay, probably going to be difficult for me to get the same kind of role, because London is a much bigger market. It's a much more competitive market. So maybe I wouldn't say I didn't have confidence in myself. I probably had a lot of confidence myself, but maybe I was a little bit disappointed at the time that, in my view, the market didn't recognize the things that I had done before. That was definitely what you called a limiting belief, because I think you should just try to do the job you're in the best possible way.
Yeah.
And not think too much about, this is where you should be or this is what you should have. And that the job content, and as long as you enjoy what you're doing and it's intellectually stimulating, that's the most important aspect.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's difficult to have that mindset all the time.
Yeah, and especially in the moment. It's often when we look back that we recognize the lesson that we were supposed to learn.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can you tell us about the importance of role models, mentors, or sponsors on your journey?
Very important, yeah. I'd say that observing. So just to give an example, I mean, I I knew a lot about economic theory when I came into my first job, but I didn't know anything about the practicalities of the financial markets, where to look up the price of a bond, where to look up an exchange rate. So my first boss taught me the practicalities. And then with all the other, managers and mentors I've had, it's a case of observing them, how they run a meeting, how they interact with clients, how they manage a team, that you learn. You imitate the things that you think work, and then you drop the stuff that you think doesn't work. But yeah, I've always benefited, from observing mentors. I probably wasn't that good at asking for advice explicitly. It's maybe a slight weakness.
Yeah.
But I would encourage anyone that, if maybe you don't have the opportunity to learn by observing, maybe you just reach out to someone and ask for advice explicitly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some of us struggle with that, whether it's, asking for somebody for help in person or over email. But, 9 times out of 10, that person's going to respond with a positive answer of course, let me help you. Let's grab coffee. I'll tell you more. Or, hey, how about you come and shadow me for a couple of hours? Or actually, this month's really tight, but next month we could do it. And I think that it's just about plucking up the courage to ask sometimes.
Exactly. Most people are flattered when they're being asked for advice. So yeah, the worst thing is that they say no, no harm done.
Yeah. Yeah. So for people who are thinking, this sounds like an interesting career, what would you say would be the essential or helpful educations or training?
I say in terms of university degree, anything numerate is helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist or, have a PhD in mathematics or something like that to be successful in the industry, but some level of certain threshold competency in anything numerate is definitely helpful.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think once you exceed that threshold, then there's a lot of other skills that become important. How you self-organize.
Yeah.
I think actually that's one of the most important things in your life, let alone your career. How you self-organize. I think, whether you follow up on things or whether you just, let things slip through the cracks, that's extremely important. What people call soft skills.
Yeah.
Like how you communicate.
Yes.
And whether you can, resolve an argument or steer a conversation into a different direction. I think it's an underestimated skill.
Yeah.
And again, the subject that you study is relevant to some extent for getting your foot in the door. But then, the specifics of what you studied may be less important than self-discipline and kind of the communication skills that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah. When we talk about soft skills, which, I think sometimes they are sometimes seen as less important than technical skills, but in my opinion, they're just as important, or actually in some cases even more so. So you mentioned being able to self-organize, discipline and communication. Are there any other of those soft skills that you feel have helped you be successful in this area?
And maybe I should qualify that earlier statement. Yeah, it depends on the role. There are certain roles where it's mostly about the technical skill. Like if you are a coder, like writing code that works is kind of the main thing. But actually, those types of roles are increasingly rare, where it's only about your technical skill. You always need to work with other people. So that's actually something that being able to collaborate with others in a productive way is probably one of the most important things in a professional context.
Yeah.
And also kind of conducting yourself in a way that people can trust you.
Yeah.
I think that's super important. I always think about two scenarios where maybe there's an individual contributor and they have some excellent outcome, like they make a winning trade or they win an important client. I think it's very important how that was achieved, how they conducted themselves when they achieved that, whether did they give credit to others or not, or did they steal credit from others. So I think these character aspects are super important.
I agree.
I was listening to a YouTube video, very old one, where Warren Buffett was speaking. He's probably the most famous investor. Investor of the last 50 years. And he was saying that the ultimate test is, for everything that you do, would you want it to be reported in the newspaper? So that should be the guiding principle. And if you wouldn't want it to be reported in the newspaper, you shouldn't do it. Yeah.
Good advice. And I really like what you talked about there, being humble. I've worked in organizations where, the success is often attributed to one individual rather than the whole team. And the culture in those organizations versus the culture in the collaborative team-based organizations that talk about we instead of me is immeasurable.
Yeah, and to take that to an extreme, I mean, if you put together your team and you say, okay, there's technical competence and whether you can trust a person, I think you wouldn't want someone who's technically very competent, but you wouldn't be able to trust.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah, I remember working for an organization about 15 years ago, and there was an individual who was amazing at their job, but they treated everybody around them very poorly, but they were able to get away with that behavior because of their performance. And it's just not right.
Yeah, and it's about the culture of the organization, whether that kind of behavior is acceptable or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about helpful or essential education, training, and softer skills. Is there anything else that you would say to somebody who's thinking about finding out more about this career? What other advice would you give to that individual?
You mentioned internships earlier, so I think that's really great advice.
Yeah.
Maybe trying to do internships in different parts of this industry.
Yeah.
I mentioned I work for an asset management company. I used to work for a bank. It's quite different. It might suit one person, but not another. So if you get the opportunity to do different internships, I think that could absolutely help you to make your career decision I mean, I've learned that in the current generation of university students, everything starts earlier. Like in your first year, you already have to think about what they call these spring internships. Concept didn't exist when I was a university, which is some kind of taster session that you have, or a very short work experience that you have in your first year of university. That concept didn't exist when I was a university student.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe taking part in these recruitment and outreach activities, is good without getting too stressed about it.
Yeah. And are there any resources that you could point people to where they might be able to find out a bit more about the profession of currency management?
Well, that would not only kind of narrow it down to currency management, but asset management. Yeah. Asset management more broadly. I think there are a lot of resources. It's the usual suspects. If you look at the Financial Times, for example, obviously there's a big section on financial markets. Just reading that is extremely useful. But there's also supplements or specialized contributions on asset management from all the reputable financial newspapers. And then these days you don't even have to pay. I think some of these publications are probably paywalled, but you can find so much. As long as you're willing to spend a little bit of time, you can find so much by just reading the annual report of one of the big asset managers. Or, going to any kind of free YouTube webcasts. So I think there's really a lot of material that's out there for free. I think the constraining factor is not the availability of useful material. The constraining factor is that you need to spend the time to actually look into it and digest it and try to apply it to your career choice. Yeah, that's good advice. So as we move towards wrapping up, what do you wish you'd known when you were starting out that you know now? I wish I'd known about kind of how the industry works a little bit more. I think maybe that's what this podcast is for. Hopefully. But I mentioned that, my parents, my teachers, even at university, I mean, there's barely anyone who could tell me the difference between the buy side and the sell side. So this is maybe I'll try to explain very briefly. So people call asset management companies, they call the buy side, just kind of, they invest the money on behalf of end investors. And then banks, exchanges, other kind of financial trading companies, what we call the sell side. They facilitate all the trading in financial markets. And, there are different functions between these two big blocks of market participants. And I wished I'd known more about what the differences are and, what kind of jobs you can perform in each of them. I mean, it certainly helps if, let's say, you have a parent that works in the industry. They can explain all this stuff to you. Or if you take part in maybe some kind of mentoring program with a financial industry professional. But if not, then you might, actively seek out one, or maybe try to network with some people who can give you advice. Yeah, and absolutely. Hopefully this can serve people who are looking to find out more, and perhaps we might need to do a follow-up episode where we have a Q&A with you, Van. That I think might be very useful for people. Yeah, I'd be up for that, yeah. So
again, thinking back to your younger self, what advice would you give that younger self who wanted to be a writer?
Oh, this is a tricky one. This is a really tricky one. I'd say that, the advice I would give is to try to use the skills that you have. In that case, writing was a skill that I had, but not to get too hung up about, in what context exactly that skill is being applied. You can enjoy certain things, and probably at a very young age, you don't have a conception of, where the skill is useful. So I think for a career, it's very important that, you enjoy what you're doing, or there's certain skills that you have, and you want to apply them, and there's certain activities that you enjoy. So that's important in your career choice. But the other important aspect is there a market for it as well?
Yeah.
And to try to find that combination of it's marketable, and I don't mean it in a negative way in any sense. I think it's important that there's a demand for what you're doing, that you're able to add some value with what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the advice that I would give myself, not to get hung up about, you need to be a novelist, or you need to become a musician, or there's many ways in which the skills that a musician has can be applied in a different context.
Yeah. And I think you talk about there really just taking note of your passions, but not getting too hung up in the context you're using them in. And actually, I was listening to a podcast the other day with Jim Collins, the Good to Great, the guy that wrote Good to Great. And he was talking about when he was younger, he kept, he called it a bug book. And he just wrote down everything that he enjoyed doing. And then he looked for the patterns, so that when he was reflecting on what he wanted to do with his life, he could kind of see that. And I thought, wow, I wish I'd kept a bug book when I was younger.
Yeah. And the opposite as well. Maybe you should write down the things that you really hate, and just cut out those things, and don't choose a career that involve a lot of those things.
Yeah, that's good advice as well. I think you hear of so many people, waking up in their 40s thinking, oh my goodness, what have I been doing for the last 20 years? So yeah, you've got to enjoy what you're doing.
And it's probably better to maybe try out a few more things while you're younger, I'd say.
Yeah.
We're all still young, but while you're kind of university and a few years after that, maybe it's okay to try a few different things.
Yeah. Van, is there a favorite quote or expression that you live by, or that you particularly like?
Yeah, so actually I knew you would ask that question. So I did pick out a quote that I've liked for a long time, actually. I'd probably say about 20 years I've liked this quote, and I'll explain the context as well. So the quote is from a racing driver, Mario Andretti. I don't know anything else about him, but the quote is, "If everything seems under control, you're not going fast enough."
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So I think, well, obviously it's about motor racing, but I think it applies to professional, it's kind of stretching yourself professionally as well. So if you feel that things are, easy, or that you're cruising, it's probably not where you want to, stick around for too long, because I think you want to challenge yourself, and if you don't challenge yourself, you will stagnate. So the other thing I'd say, I'm not advocating burning yourself out. So
Yeah.
I'll be very clear about that. So that's not what's meant by,
Yeah.
going faster and faster and faster.
Yeah.
It's just, stretching yourself.
Yeah. Being aware of when you're in your comfort zone and maybe you need to, step it up a gear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
Van, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I have found this so fascinating, and I know that the audience will too. So before we say goodbye, are there any closing words of wisdom or encouragement you'd like to leave with the audience?
I really enjoyed it. So thanks very much for inviting me. The closing remark I would have is you don't make it by yourself. There's parents and teachers and mentors and colleagues that help you along the way. So it's always important to remember that.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Van. Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We really hope you enjoyed the show. If you gained any value out of today's episode, please help us spread the word by subscribing to the podcast. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, we would love your feedback. Please use the links in the show notes to get in touch. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.